Right, welcome back everybody for the second part of the morning. So I'm going to introduce who's actually my co-chair taking over in the afternoon, Natalie Cohen, whom I know several people know, not only for her years of, on the committee, CBA Southeast, but her extensive work in the Southeast in general. So Natalie's been cathedral archaeologist at Canterbury for the past 5 years, over 10 years with National Trust, is regional archaeologist for Kent and East Sussex, and formerly before that, several years with MOLA and the Thames Discovery Programme. And she's very well known for her work on the Knoll Archaeology Unwrapped project. And just to say, Natalie also got her MA in Maritime Archaeology at UCL. We seem to have a lot of UCL graduates in the lineup today, and she got that in 2007. So today, she's going to be speaking to us on Canterbury in particular, England in Stone, Archaeology at Canterbury Cathedral. So if you'd like to share when you're ready, Natalie.
Okay. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Marvelous. Okay, so I am going to do a fairly sort of rapid dash today through just some of the projects that have been underway during the last 5 years at Canterbury Cathedral. And we're starting off here with a picture from just, from Thursday this week, just showing the scaffolding that's currently covering the western end of the building. So just to put in context where we are and where I'm speaking about today, this is a reconstruction of the cathedral, the Christchurch Priory and its precincts in the early decades of the 15th century by the University of York. And I thought it was a useful way of kind of orientating us around some of the areas where we've had projects underway. So running roughly from north on the left-hand side to south on the right-hand side, we've had projects in the what is now the King's School, so in the area of the Almonry Chapel, building surveys of some of the canonical residences, including the Archdeaconry, which is just to the north of the cathedral, so the area where the Great Kitchen was. Extensive landscaping works as part of the Canterbury Journey project, which I'll be talking about as we go along. It's obviously our major project that is underway there at the moment. Drainage works also associated with the Canterbury Journey, and new construction for the visitor welcome and other areas on that southern boundary of the cathedral, including at the Christchurch Gate. Just to orient you to the interior of this incredibly large and very complex building, we're looking here at a phased plan of the cathedral proper. And just to put a few more dots on the map, we've had projects in the southern walk of the cloister, in the nave at vault level, within the area of the North Choir aisle, where we've had the new organ loft installed. Sorry, that's that one there, the pulpit screen. Projects in the water tower, and also, the third arrow was meant to be pointing at the crypt, where we have new exhibitions being installed, as we do also in the water tower. And finally, research work undertaken on the Eastern Crypt as part of the celebrations or commemorations for the Becket anniversary, which happened in 2020. So it's safe to say, I think, that Canterbury Cathedral is quite a busy place, and possibly the reason why we are seeing comments like this coming in. So I visited Canterbury Cathedral recently and was saddened to note a large amount of scaffolding attached to the structure. 1,400 years of construction and still not finished. Another sad reflection of the rip-off Britain building trade. This is obviously a comment not made entirely seriously, because the source of this comment is Viz, but it is worth noting that Canterbury for many years now has looked like a construction site, And to be honest, that is not going to change a huge amount going forward. So starting with some of those sort of infrastructure and building works, a lot of the capital works to the cathedral building as part of the Canterbury journey have been involved looking at adaptations to the building to help sort of mitigate the events, the effects of extreme weather events. So particularly looking at things like rainwater and guttering. So this is one of the new gargoyles that has been installed at high roof level on the western end, and has been designed by the Canterbury Cathedral's team of masons to reflect the fragmentary remains of the medieval water infrastructure that would have been there in the past, which had been replaced in the 18th century by this, and I think you can only term this arrangement of lead hoppers and sort of guttering that wasn't really performing as it needed to, and was meaning that not only was the water not being routed particularly well, but also is having an impact on the stonework. So drainage is a big part of the Canterbury Journey project, and that also involved groundworks as well. So looking at improving the infrastructure below ground as well as above ground. So one of the first projects that took place as part of this major project was a long drainage trench running through the southern part of the precincts, so through parts of the lay cemetery. So around 100 inhumations were impacted by this and have been recorded and are currently being assessed by the Canterbury Archaeological Trust, who are our main contractors on the site. So looking more widely at other sort of infrastructure works as part of the Canterbury Journey, you can see we're looking at the southern part of the cathedral precincts here. So the drainage trench and boreholes ran across the south lawn in this area. All of this area that is shaded brown is part of the new landscaping works. So all of the pre-existing paving was lifted, services were upgraded, and new paving was installed. So a huge area of excavation. Also in this area here, excavations for the construction of the new Welcome Centre, which is now up and running and open. So just to sort of compare and contrast in terms of sizes, this is the 1990s excavations within the Nave, also undertaken by the Canterbury Archaeological Trust. So you can get an idea of the sort of scale of the archaeological works that have been happening over the last 5 years. And this is, of course, what that looks like. So quite intrusive, hugely exciting for an archaeologist, and a lot for sort of visitors to take in as they're coming in through the Christchurch Gate, which is just in the background of the picture here. So the landscaping works was undertaken in phases and in sequences to allow for paving to be lifted, but maintaining access for residents within the precincts, and of course for emergency access as well. As I said, really, a very exciting opportunity to look at parts of the cathedral precinct that maybe haven't been studied in detail before, and this work is still at assessment stage. So there is reporting still to come in from the Canterbury Archaeological Trust. So just as a brief summary, we're looking here at a picture of the western end of the cathedral, so right at the west front. And here we had evidence for post-medieval building. So the boundary between the Archbishop's precinct and the Priory precinct is right in this area. Parts of the 16th century Archbishop's Palace were excavated and recorded, and also a whole range of smaller items coming from the deposits within this area. So suggestive that potentially some of these areas were used as marketplace, performed a marketplace function at times. So the top of the slide there, you can see a picture of a 17th century bread token. We also had a late 16th, early 17th century Nuremberg jeton of Hans Krawinkel. The legend on this one is so appropriate for Canterbury Cathedral. It reads, God's kingdom endures forever. And the image at the bottom is of a tiny, they're sometimes referred to as tear bottles, and sometimes believed to be Roman, but this one is probably, again, a post-medieval example, excavated from within the area of the new Welcome Centre. So the archaeological works, as far as the excavations go, are now completed, in fact completed in August 2020. And the final piece of landscaping was right under the Christchurch Gate, which you can see in the image on the left. So the Christchurch Gate is the major piece of work that remains continuing as part of the Canterbury journey, and this is the conservation works to the facade of the early 16th century Christchurch Gate, which is undergoing an extensive programme of very, very careful conservation cleaning by the cathedral masons team, and also a lot of careful research by conservators and art historians looking at the colour schemes of the various friezes and motifs across that facade, and looking at the levels at which cleaning is needed, and also the levels to which the polychromy will be reinstated. It's going to look, I think the word that was used on Thursday is it's going to look bright when it's finished. The colours are going to be quite vibrant, I think, quite medieval. So from one gate to another, we're moving back to the north of the site, to the area of the Mint Yard, which is very close to the mid-12th century Aula Nova and the guest range, so within the cathedral's precincts, to have a quick look at another large open area excavation undertaken by the Canterbury Archaeological Trust. This is at what was the Mitchinson's house for the King's School, which is being converted into a science block. So this site was actually excavated, or partly excavated, for the construction of Mitchinson's in the late 70s, when the remains of the Almonry Chapel were discovered and recorded, and somewhat sadly subsequently removed by the construction of Mitchinson's house. The new science block is it has a slightly larger footprint, so the excavations were able to be extended further into the north of the Mint Yard, revealing a really lovely, actually, medieval sequence, which you can see in the section there, and also parts of a very substantial Roman road running through this part of the site. Again, this project was only completed relatively recently, and so assessment is still underway by Canterbury Archaeological Trust. A smaller intervention here, this is the one I mentioned in the cloister, within the southern walk of the cloister. The proposal here is to put an access lift to allow for a much more accessible, we have a sort of movable lift bit of infrastructure there at the moment. The idea is to install a permanent lift platform that will rise up just those few steps to take you from the cloister walk level to the northwest door of the church. Unlike some of the excavations that we've seen so far, like the Mint Yard, this is a very, very shallow excavation, but with very complex archaeology and sort of a lot of stratigraphy packed into it, 300 to 400 mil depth that was excavated. So on the left, you see Dana Goodbrand-Brown and Emma Norton and Jessica from the Canterbury Archaeological Trust, working with another conservator to lift some of the surface that we're going to talk about in a minute. The bottom of the sequence, though, so the depth to which the evaluation was undertaken, actually revealed parts of the early medieval church. So we're looking on the right-hand side there at parts of the 10th century cathedral. So enormously exciting to be able to get a glimpse of that. The slides don't want to move. So our excavation for the lift is just here. This is the 1990s excavations by Canterbury Archaeological Trust. The red is the late Saxon cathedral, the western extent of it. You can see at the bottom of the image there we have the southwest tower shown. Essentially what we have in our trench in the cloister walk is part of the northwest tower foundations revealed. So above those early medieval foundations, we had an in situ tile floor. Really interesting, these tiles actually, because they are in date, they're local manufacturer from Tyler Hill. In date, they are late 13th to early 14th century, which is actually earlier than the fabric, the upstanding built heritage around them, which is late 14th, early 15th century. So whether these are a retained earlier floor of the previous cloister construction, or whether they are tiles recycled from elsewhere and relaid into the cloister during a later phase of building is a question yet to be answered. There was a really beautiful decorated tile amongst them. So again, Tyler Hill manufacturer and of the same date, and probably showing a pilgrim. So to continue with our pilgrimage theme, we're going to sort of have a little tour around the building, and this is all going to be quite fast, I'm afraid. So I mentioned the water tower earlier. The view to the left is the base of the water tower, so looking from the cathedral building to the north out to this incredible piece of 12th century engineering. This part of the building is now at first floor level, just this section here is open to the public with one of the new exhibitions, which includes some of the treasures of the cathedral. So on the left-hand side, you can see a 10th century portable sundial, which was discovered in the 1930s in the cloister garth. And on the right-hand side are the 12th century chalice and pattern found in the tomb of Hubert Walter, the Archbishop, who's buried in the Trinity Chapel. When it was opened in the Victorian period, they found these items, as well as an extraordinary range of textiles and the man himself. The second exhibition I mentioned is going to be within the Western Crypt. So it actually will be in this view just behind where this photograph was taken. And this will show some of the other, there's so many treasures at Canterbury Cathedral, but this will include things like the Black Prince's achievements, some of Hubert Walter's vestments, and also I'm delighted to say pilgrim badges found on the Thames foreshore. So this head of Thomas Becket found by James Ward, and this found by Tony Thera, which was originally identified as a martyrdom scene of Thomas Becket, but some absolutely cracking research work by Colin Terode has actually, well, I think fairly conclusively demonstrated that this is actually showing the martyrdom of a later archbishop. So this is the Archbishop Simon Sudbury being murdered at the Tower of London during the Peasants' Revolt in the late 14th century. So this is what the nave of Canterbury Cathedral currently looks like, and has looked like for, well, quite a long time now. And above, at the top of the picture, you can see the safety deck. So that is a huge scaffolding construction that has been installed to allow access to the nave vaults so that they can be cleaned, conservation work undertaken, and archaeological recording. And this is what that space looks like, which is an incredible place to be in. The other major piece of work that has taken place up here is all of these Victorian stained glass windows have been taken out, conserved, and are currently going back in again. And the safety deck is due to come down in the early part of next year. The Friends of Canterbury Cathedral supported the Canterbury Archaeological Trust in an additional piece of recording in this area, which was to record all of the masons' marks that they could see on those nave vaults. An extraordinary piece of work by Rupert Austin and his team. This, you could do a whole lecture just on this sort of section alone. The information that it's giving us about the sequence of construction, reuse of materials, different masons involved is it's an absolutely brilliant piece of work. This, of particular note, parts of the fabric in the westernmost end at the Severy of the nave vaults have been used as a kind of ad hoc workshop with architectural designs, window schemes, scratched on the walls, and Canterbury has a really notable collection of architectural inscriptions. So not only in the nave vaults. This is probably another window design. This is from the route up to Bell Harry, so in the central part of the cathedral. And in the treasury undercroft, so at ground level in this part of the treasury building on the northern side of the cathedral, we have an enormous collection of architectural sketches. So potentially this area is being used as a mason's lodge, and if indeed it is a medieval mason's lodge, it is, I believe, unique in this country to have survived. Other projects, new organ loft in the north choir aisle, and the organ was relocated from where it was, which I think was in the south transept, round to the other side of the building. So a huge piece of work undertaken here. Archaeologically, this required some intervention within the floor surface there, and also a record was made of the fabric of the easterly screen to the right-hand side, which is covered in graffiti, which is pretty standard for the whole of the cathedral, really. So working with Matthew Champion, we have a record of that plaster surface, dozens and dozens of inscriptions, including these compass-drawn designs, which are not architectural, so maybe possibly astronomical, and lots and lots and lots of pre-Reformation text, which is really, really common at the cathedral. It's a very written upon place. This sign near the water tower is part of the collections itself, actually, but is a real sort of shutting the what's that expression, shutting the gate after the horse is bolted, because it is, the building is covered in historic and also sadly modern graffiti. So moving to graffiti just a moment, and moving to the Eastern Crypt, just a couple of examples of some of the graffiti that has been recorded through the Canterbury Journeys volunteer recording project. This is a photo by Dr. David Rundle, and shows some medieval text that reads W. Bald. So this is potentially identifiable to an individual, possibly one of the mayors of Canterbury in 1457, visiting the crypt. And here you see this is a visit from Joe and Colin coming to meet with the graffiti research volunteers, you can see on the left. So this is the Eastern Crypt, and this is an area that I've been focusing on over the last sort of year or so because of the Beckett anniversary, and because of the significance of this Eastern arm and its development over time. Most of my work is actually focused within the crypt area, but there's obviously been a huge amount of work underway at all different levels of the building, including Leonie Sellinger and Rachel Koopman's brilliant work on the miracle windows. David Neal and Tim Tatton Brown are currently working on the pavement. There's an academic study underway. So it's a very sort of busy place academically, Canterbury as well. The Eastern Crypt has not maybe been, well, it has been really, it's a really interesting space, the Eastern Crypt. It's been, lots of people have looked at it, but it's not been recorded archaeologically in an enormous amount of detail. So here it is. This is looking in from the Western Crypt into that Eastern arm, and this is an extension of the 1174 onwards. So essentially, this is the location of Becket's original burial after his martyrdom in 1170. Then there's a fire in 1174, which means large parts of the eastern arm of the cathedral are destroyed, and there is a huge rebuilding program that is only fully completed by 1220, at which point Becket is translated upstairs into the Trinity Chapel proper, which is directly above this image here. Post-dissolution, this space was actually blocked off and was used as a cellar for some of the residences next door in the infirmary chapel. So it seems likely that at that point an access was inserted from the outside, and there is a flight of stairs that runs into this space just up in here. So we have early records of 18th and early 19th century visitors to this space. So while it was still blocked off from the remainder of the cathedral, and it seems to have been used largely for storage, so for coal and for faggots and all kinds of things that were just being literally dumped in this space. It was eventually opened up again in the mid 19th century, which prompted a real flurry of investigation of the space. So in 1878, we have this record of the inscriptions that are on this wall. So this is the western wall of the eastern crypt, and there is again a huge amount of graffiti in the across the whole space, but really significant large-scale inscriptions, particularly clustered around these two piers. And the most famous one, the one that is preserved beneath this glass case, is a scene of the evangelist. So Christ in Majesty, surrounded by the four emblems of the evangelist. Very hard to photograph given the glass over it. Late 1880s, there are also excavations underway in the Eastern Crypt. And one of the things that they discovered was this. So this is a body which was assumed at the time to be Thomas Becket. And again, there's a whole lecture's worth of content on just this burial. This individual was reinterred post its initial discovery. Other discoveries during this same sort of phase of excavation are recorded in the cathedral archives. So we have the record of Harry Den, one of the workmen of the cathedral, who describes sort of moving some old foundation in the crypt and came across an old well, found it was full of oyster shells, and he was working with the archaeological people, and he's describing a feature that is still marked in the floor at the easternmost end of the Eastern Crypt before you get to the Corona Chapel. So presumably this is the original medieval well, and there's lots to say about the pre and post fire location of this well and whether it's inside or outside the building. So we'll move swiftly on. So this is what the crypt looked like in around 1900, when that process of conservation and restoration was complete. And you can see we also have the fragmentary remains of painted wall surfaces as well. 1930s, these two shoes were discovered in the South Corona stair chamber. 16th century shoes, probably sort of mid to late 16th century shoes. I'm indebted to Jackie Kiley for the identification of these. So potentially some ritual protective aspects around the dissolution period here. The gentleman in the crypt was dug up again in the 1940s, and it was at that point that they decided it probably wasn't Becket. So he went for a scientific assessment and was subsequently reburied, bar one tooth, which is still in the cathedral archives, which would be amazing to get radiocarbon dated. Other works during the 1960s, a graffiti survey by two schoolboys at the King's School, an amazing piece of archaeological recording, and their archives are held by the cathedral. So they basically numbered and recorded and planned very beautifully all of the graffiti they could see, medieval inscriptions. More graffiti recording. This is in the Corona stair chambers, so where those shoes were found. It's a very odd entrance into it. You appear to drop through a hole in the floor. Obviously an area that is not very accessible. So very, very beautiful surviving graffiti and mason's marks mainly in this space. And most recently, again, the University of York, through their sort of research project, has produced these really lovely reconstructions of what the space would have looked like in the early decades of the 15th century, and how it would have been used as a place of pilgrimage, and also some indications of how it might have been decorated, including these red tiles on the floor. There are medieval tiles surviving at the Corona Crypt chapel right at the eastern end. These are reset into the floor, and again are the sort of late 13th, early 14th century Tyler Hill tiles. So very quickly on just a quick note on the graffiti. it is noticeable the sort of continually repeated motifs that you see. So particularly some, as one example, these are some of the eagles that are drawn in the crypt. This is in the crypt, this is in the Eastern Crypt, and this is actually upstairs within the Trinity Chapel. So some really interesting research to still come, looking at things like manuscript illustrations and comparing how these things are drawn. So this is a bestiary of around 1200 held in the collections at the University of Aberdeen. The floor itself is a patchwork of recycled, reused stone, including sort of architectural fragments, probable grave slabs, and definite grave slabs. So this rather beautiful decorated floor slab, which to my knowledge hasn't been recorded in detail before. And this as well, which if anyone has any suggestions on this, I'd be very, very glad to hear about them. This one is actually underneath one of the piers of the 1174, post-1174 rebuild. So presumably, potentially could be part of that pre-existing structure. We'll jump over this, which is the descriptions of how that chapel was rebuilt in the post-fire period. And the conjectures really around what the eastern arm of the cathedral looked like before the fire. So this is Willis's proposed plan, showing the building essentially that Becket would have known. So this is the area here where he was originally interred after his martyrdom, and this was the place, this building is the building that he would have known during his lifetime. There is, because it's Canterbury and because it's wonderful, there is this 12th century waterworks plan now held at Cambridge, which shows that eastern arm with a square-ended chapel there. But this has not been proved by excavation, so we don't know really exactly how big or the extent of it. What we can say is possibly how it was decorated. So from that kind of middle decades of the 12th century, there is more and more information about how the building looked. So we have the surviving fragments of mid-12th century architecture, for example, in St. Anselm's Chapel on the south side. We have these astonishing mid-12th century wall paintings surviving in St. Gabriel's. And of course, the incredibly exciting discoveries recently, again by Leonie Sellinger and UCL, that fragments of the window glass, parts of the ancestor windows, are also of that mid-12th century date, proving Madeleine Cavanagh's theories of the 1980s. And of course, there is also surviving ironwork. So the door in the North Choir Aisle, parts of the hinge mechanisms, the strap mechanisms are mid-12th century, as is parts of the ironwork to a number of the chapels. So we can even, looking at the glass that went in after the fire, have a think about how some of these spaces might have been lit from the elements that are shown in the miracle windows. And here we see this is a reconstruction of that Trinity Chapel during the mid-11th century. So with Becket's tomb in place and the two earlier archbishops, who were the only other individuals that we know were definitively buried in that space. So who the tooth belongs to, it would be a really interesting question to resolve. So I shall leave it there with some acknowledgements to my colleagues at Canterbury Cathedral and at Canterbury Archaeological Trust, and to a number of specialists that I've consulted over the years. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. I can tell the challenge that was to condense that into a 30-minute talk. But I can imagine a whole series and a whole day of yes, much longer talks. That was fascinating. For time-wise, I'm just gonna go. There's one question already in the chat. I think it was just whether you can elaborate slightly on what's the Canterbury journey. What did you mean when you referred to that? I think it was quite early on.
So the Canterbury journey is our major, apologies, I should have kind of introduced that better. So that is our major Heritage Lottery funded programme of works, which has been running since 2016. It is overrunning because of various reasons, pandemic included, and it is a £32 million programme of capital works, conservation and new interpretation. So a number of the elements that I've touched on today relate to projects underway because of that particular project.
Okay. Thank you. And I know you're really good at sort of manning the chat anyway. So if any other direct questions, come in, please do answer them. So thank you very much for your talk. It was really, really good. So I'm going to stop the recording now.